Hello, this is Lynn Fraser with the Radical Recovery Summit 2023. In this conversation with Daniela Hess Grant and Christopher Grant from Yoga Farm Ithaca, we explore the medicine of addiction, how we use substances and behaviors to manage our lives, and how addictions can move from fun and bonding of drinking with our friends to having serious effects on our health and our life. Their curriculum cultivates vibrant physical health, emotional balance, and mental clarity, healing the root causes of suffering and returning individuals to the stunning recognition of their own worthiness. Hello, everyone. This is Lynn Fraser with Radical Recovery Summit. I'm so delighted to be here with Christopher Grant and Daniela Hess Grant, both from Yoga Farm Ithaca. And I've been associated with Daniela. I think we've known each other about 5 or 6 years. A long time, and I do some teaching at Yoga Farm as well. And I really wanted to invite you to have a conversation about addiction, and in particular about healing and healing through the body. So obviously there's yoga involved. And one of the things I respect so much about Yoga Farm is that it's the broad view of yoga. It's not just asana and poses. It's not just being in a class. It's really what we do in our daily life and how we let that transform ourselves and our lives. Whatever you want to share about your own kind of history with addiction or what brought you to the point where you are now, and then we'll go from there.
Well, Lynn, thank you for having us both here. I just adore you. We have known one another probably for about 6 years now. And, when you ask for something earnestly, it appears. And I remember asking, I'd really love to learn some more gentle ways of relaxing because I love inquiry and I really wanted to take that relaxing in the body even more deep. And you showed up in Facebook with your daily meditations at 8 a.m., 7 days a week. And I would come and listen to your meditations, and it was exactly what I was looking for. And my own journey with addiction, there are really two primary addictions that I navigated. The first was an on and off 20-year relationship with tobacco. And then there was a circumstantial addiction, I'll say that, with alcohol that I took a deep nosedive with for about a year. And what I could see as I was going through it and as I was finding my way was that I saw the innocence of my addiction in that. It was very logical. I didn't know how to navigate the emotions that I was experiencing. I didn't know how to navigate my internal dialogue about circumstances, about what I made things mean about myself, my deficiency stories. And so it's logical that I wanted to change the way I was feeling. I was full. I was full of discomfort internally. And so the addictions that I really would say almost chose me, I really came to see how they were temporarily affording me that which I didn't know how to do myself. So smoking was a habit that I picked up when I was working at a camp for really challenged youth. And when the staff would take their break, I wasn't a smoker yet, right? The staff would take their break, and I saw everybody was smoking. And so that's where my journey with tobacco began as an immediate coping mechanism for the heartache that was there under the surface of working with these youth and not having any other skills for ourselves as support staff to support ourselves. So it was something that could instantly make us feel a little bit better, a little more cheerful. We all smoked together. It was bonding. It was community. It was connection, right? So it checked all the boxes. Mm-hmm. And then I quit at different times. When I was pregnant, I have 2 children. I quit easy peasy when I was pregnant because it was for another, right? It was like a no-brainer. And then as soon as I could start smoking again and life started getting more tricky, it was where I found my little breaks from parenting, from mothering. I would go outside on my steps where I couldn't be seen. And it was like a pranayama. So I could even see, on the other side of my addictions, kind of the genius of them. I was like only a few steps away from it being a real, it was so close, right? I just missed the mark just a little bit. And then with alcohol, I turned to alcohol one year when there was a grief, there was a heartache. And I came to discover, wow, alcohol oftentimes tends to be for people that have a lot of anger or a lot of unattended sorrow.
Mhm.
And there was a circumstance that arose that I felt so much pain, so much sadness around, and I didn't have the skills in any other way yet to
Mhm.
navigate that. I couldn't handle the thoughts or the emotions. So it was inquiry was the practice, inquiry and embodiment.
Mhm.
That is what made all the difference in the world for me. That was, I noticed as my inquiry skills increased and as I got more and more comfortable and more freedom from my mind and a deeper friendliness in my mind with inquiry, I noticed all on its own, the cigarettes that I rolled were shorter and thinner.
Mhm.
I noticed I would roll a cigarette and I only wanted half. I just was done. And
Mhm.
then they even got shorter and shorter, and the space between when I would smoke got wider and wider. And what really kicked it for me was that I got a little pissed. I was like, what if my joy is inauthentic? What if I'm a miserable person without this? So that motivated me then to become free of those last cigarettes. Because at this point, I wasn't even physically addicted. I was smoking so little
Mhm.
and it was like the hardest thing to quit. It was like saying goodbye to an old friend, you know, that I just got to hang out with. So I said, well, I'm going to go away for the weekend. I needed a change of environment. I knew. I said, I want to mix in quitting with something that'll kind of impact my energy body so I won't know the difference. Is it the practices I'm doing, the yoga practices, or is it the quitting the tobacco? So I went to a Kundalini weekend and I couldn't tell, right? All that I was experiencing and feeling inside, it was I couldn't figure out, was this the practice or me wanting tobacco? And then when I came home, it was done. And the years since that I have not smoked, I have navigated, I would say, the most challenging chapters of my life, far more challenging than anything even at that point.
Mhm.
And the thought, let's have a drink or let's smoke, has not thought me. Like it's just not there. So, so for me, it was the combination of inquiry, and I mean continual inquiry. It wasn't just now and then. It's a witnessing of the mind all day long, catching immediately deficiency stories and
Mhm.
working with it, connecting with the sensations in my body. And dance and movement, that was really fun. That was also an essential ingredient. So those were the necessary factors for me to really experience full freedom with those two addictions.
So how did you get involved in inquiry and meditation and yoga, and how did you get onto that path?
Very young. I remember sleeping with two books under my pillow. A Wrinkle in Time, because that was one of my first lessons on like the power of love, and the book Siddhartha. The iconography, Buddhist iconography, found me when I was very young. I just loved it, and I just followed that passion. And I came to Ithaca, so I initially could be a student, and then went on to assist in the running of Namgyal Monastery, the His Holiness the Dalai Lama's monastery here in North America. So meditation was my primary entrance. I loved meditation, and I was an addict all through this, but that really found me. I remember when I was young, the Buddha's Four Noble Truths found me, and it like pierced me. And it seemed very sane, seemed like a sane map. You know, there's suffering in life. The mind is the problem. The mind is the solution. And here are some steps. Know the problem.
Yeah.
And there's the solution. Now, of course, I'm simplifying this. It's much more complex than that. But in my young
Mhm.
mind, I'm like, oh, it's finally naming the problem and
Right.
that there's a solution. I would like that. Yes, please. So that
Right.
became my obsession. I wanted to understand what is the nature of suffering for myself and others, and how do we become free of it? And that found me at a very young age, and it never left. My gaze was locked on that.
Okay.
Um, and so that's what drew me to meditation. I wanted to understand, well, if the suffering has a connect to the mind, I best get to know my mind. And from there, of course, attending to the body with yoga through prescribed methodology of yoga and Qigong, as well as instinctive and intuitive movement and yoga. I love that equally as much.
Oh, cute. And so when you were drinking and that fell away, was that kind of in the middle of that process or when was that?
Drinking quit and then the tobacco quit.
Oh, I see. Okay. Right.
Yep, it was in that order. It was in that order. So the tobacco was on and off for 20 years. Then the drinking was this 1 year quit that quit me, and then the tobacco quit. And the drinking, I was on a fast nosedive. I was going to make really terrible messes if that didn't stop. And I
Didn't-
remember going to a concert, and one of my favorite artists, Matisyahu, played my favorite song. Like the song that I love so much, if I were on an island and it was on blast and never stopped, it was always on
Okay.
loud. One day he played, and I just said, okay, this is that one day. This ends now. This ends now.
Hmm. But I like what you mentioned about these addictive processes and substances are like a friend and they're very comforting. And so if we don't have that connection with ourselves, we're really vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. I was just so astounded over the years since the addictions quit me. As I've come to understand them in my own journey, I feel so much compassion for myself and for those processes in my life for others who experience addiction. And I see, this may sound crazy, but I see the kind logic in them.
Hmm. Hmm.
I really do, right? Like someone who's longing to feel love, it makes sense they turn to a substance that has them feel love, not necessarily numb, like a food addiction has a different impact on the system than alcohol
Right.
and then does heroin, right? So it matches up. It's no coincidence that I chose alcohol was the right remedy, right temporary medicine
Right.
versus something else. So versus gambling, right? I'd never be at risk of being a gambler.
Right.
That just because it's not solving the problem I had.
Right. Right. Yeah, exactly.
So I also really loved the practice. I don't recall who I can attribute this to. It may have been a Ram Dass, something I read from Ram Dass years ago, but it was always about inviting everything closer to have tea with you. And that was
Mm,
also an important part of my inquiry was not just like the work of Byron Katie, but it was also having a contemplative inquiry session with my addict in my meditation. And I would meet it and get to know these different facets of myself. And I would sit and have tea with the addiction and learn from it. I sat at the feet of it like it was a very important teacher.
mhm, mhm,
I would study what's happening in my mind when I first started thinking about the addiction during the day.
mhm.
I would study and learn from these meditative inquiry sessions. What is it? What are you helping me do that I don't have access to myself? What are you
Right.
protecting me from? What do I think it'll cost me if I give you up? All these conversations were an invaluable part of the process because I didn't see it as a bad and wrong. I just saw it as I'm stuck and you're helping me do something I don't know how to do. And it's also not working. It's also, this isn't working. Let's be clear, friends. We're so,
Right.
but that was a very important part of the process too. So I didn't spiral into horrific shame because I saw that coming and I was like, I've got to get ahead
Mhm,
of this.
mhm.
I've
Right.
got to get ahead of that.
Cool. Yeah. Wow. So, Christopher, let's bring you in. And what's your experience? What would you like to share?
Thank you, Lynn, and thank you, Daniela, for that beautiful exploration of the space. My journey is a little different than what Daniela shared and what many of you who are with us today have shared. I slingshotted into addiction when I emerged from my Christian family household after high school and went to college. My parents were very strict, and I saw my friends out there, what I thought was having fun, having some beers or whatever. And I went to college and I thought everything that my parents are telling me aren't good for me probably are good for me. So I'm going to try them all. I'm going to find out for myself. And throughout college, I spent a lot of time drinking, and it was a very, very popular and commonly accepted thing there. And in hindsight, there were some times throughout that experience, throughout all those experiences of college and in my early 20s, where I would touch in to some source energy beyond what's easily understandable. No idea what was happening. Sometimes it would be with drinking, sometimes not. And it was very, very fascinating to feel something beyond. And when I finished college and left that environment, I found marijuana. Marijuana was my primary addiction. I was addicted to marijuana for about 15 years. The first half of that, enjoying it and loving it, and the second half of that, trying to extricate myself from a very sticky trap that I was in. And I landed on marijuana because it most closely replicated those experiences that I was having on a meditation retreat. Like I would go to a meditation and within a few minutes start feeling something, and it would provide me with so much energy that I would launch out of there, leave the meditation, and not come back for months because I felt something that was really, really precious for me. So I ended up in New York City, tried all the psychedelics and all that whole basket of things, and just liked the feeling that I had when I got high. I just liked getting high. I liked the reliability of it. I liked being able to keep something close to me that I could use to change the way that I was feeling so that I didn't have to feel sadness and depression. It helped me with anxiety. I had a lot of trouble sleeping when I was in my late teens and early 20s. And so I found that this would help with that as well. It would stop my mind. It would help me enjoy the present moment, right? I thought enjoying the present moment is a good thing. All the teachers are speaking of this and holding this up. And here's a substance that helps me to do that. And it wasn't until my 30s that I started trying to stop this that I realized that I was stuck, that I realized that this had become an addiction. And so I started exploring yoga and meditation and going on retreats and doing everything I could, gradually more and more and more and more painting marijuana as my problem, as the problem over there. So that was my pattern that lasted for quite a few years, where I thought that I need to get rid of this, that this is the problem, that the problem's out there. And when I really was getting fed up with this, I started with one coach who shared something like what Daniela shared, which is to turn it around and to invite this in, to bring it closer rather than constantly pushing it away. Because I was in a fight. Never, yes, no, today, not today, never again. You know, if I had managed to put marijuana in any of those boxes, I wouldn't have ultimately become free of this addiction. It wasn't controllable. And in hindsight, my inability to use all of everything I could possibly bring to bear to contain this, to direct it, to control it in some way, ends up being an incredible gift to me in my life. And so the first step was the same idea that Daniela brought up, to invite this to tea, right? I learned this from a coach, of bring it closer. And that was my first time of turning this around. And instead of making this substance the enemy, of saying, okay, there's something here for me. And what was there for me was this long habit I had developed of chasing peak experiences and denying the shadows, denying the darkness, denying the hard feeling things. And then when I met Daniela, she became quite a guide for me and led me through some of the inquiry practices that she's already explained about, and assisted me in going underneath all of that to explore, how is marijuana serving me? Like, why did I bring it in? Like, what is this medicine for? How is it serving me, or how is it helping me to avoid and to hide and to stay away from something? What's under that? And there was a late in my struggle for freedom, there was a session that she guided me through, an inquiry process, where finally I came to understand what I was running from, what I was hiding from, what I was using this to mask, what was underneath, what was at the root of that and had been in the very, very beginning. And that freedom that this understanding brought, combined with all the built up longing to be free of this, was the beginning of the end. It was the beginning of the end of it. And so I use these substances. I also use tobacco and alcohol, and I would call them the three twisted sisters. And I was like in this perpetual attempt to find the right balance of these three things so that I could stay feeling great. Yeah. And as you know, as anyone who's here with us knows, it's a failing strategy. Like you cannot stay high. Like, you always come down. And so I was led to a beautiful meditation teacher who gave me some tools and helped me to start to break apart these dense formations that I had created around my rigidity of wanting this and trying to control that. And so that was the opening, the breathwork practices and the meditation practices were an opening to feel what I had experienced back when I started dabbling in substances. Those random moments of connection to infinity, to divine source, to something beyond, to something that can't be explained in words, started to show up again and give me a little bit of pure energy that isn't from this external source. And then that was a big part of it. I was doing yoga throughout. My friends would laugh at me. They'd be like, "You're getting high before you're going to yoga? Like, really? Why?" I'm like, "I get high before everything." Because it makes everything better. Why wouldn't I? And I had a marriage break apart over my addiction. That was all on me. And then when I started getting together with Daniela, I didn't want to make that mistake again. So I was a little bit more willing to work the tools and came to understand in hindsight that this is my most important teacher. That this journey was my most important teacher because it was the thing that humbled me. It was the thing that brought me to my knees to ask God for help. Nothing else was. I wasn't doing that on my own. In the end, when I hit bottom, again and again and again, and finally I was bottoming out enough that I prayed and asked for help. And turns out when we pray and ask for help with a sincere heart, oftentimes something arrives.
Right.
And I was ready to take that lifeline and start extricating myself from it. And it in the end, it wasn't willpower. Like, willpower was something that I was trying all along, and that was just putting distance between me and needing to face what was there. And in the end, it was the meditation practices, the meditation and breathwork practices, combined with the frank conversation inside of me that led me to the path out.
Right. Wow. So that's an interesting question to pursue. Like, if getting high makes everything better, why would we not want to just get high all the time?
Yeah.
So there must have been a sense that actually wasn't really working. So did that sense of this isn't working develop over time?
The sense that this isn't working was there anytime I didn't have it, anytime it wasn't present. All of the unaddressed conversations or shadows or emotions were waiting in the wings.
Right.
So whenever it wasn't there, by choice or not by choice, it showed up. And it turns out, like, making everything better, sure, we'd all love that. And it didn't really. Like, there were a lot of lies there. Like, marijuana is a kind of a siren. Like, it's singing a song that sounds like everything will be better. And it's not. It's not. And the problem with trying to be high all the time is, like, the lows there, our life moves through highs and lows. In an integrated approach with help and with practices and with acceptance, right, with the open hand, allows the lows as well as the peaks. Our valleys and our mountains mirror each other. You can't have a mountain without a valley. You can't have a valley without a mountain. They're together in nature. They coexist. They inter-are, right? And so I had to be willing to feel sad and to cry and to let out some of that depression that I had been keeping at bay. This isn't clinical depression. This is just like the ups and downs of life, right? I had to allow that back in order to integrate this and understand my life and create a new base for whatever experiences were there to come for me.
It's interesting how, you start off just having fun. It's like Daniela talked about, and bonding with all the other counselors at camp. And, you're in college, you're having fun, and it's so accepted, especially in college, high school probably as well for many people. But that drinking to the point of being unconscious is fun. And it's not. When I look back on that time, I'm like, God, I was puking and I was really miserable. But there was something so compelling about I needed to get out of my own experience. I needed to change something. I needed to avoid something. And it does its job really well,
I think there's something to be said too I can also find where I perceived, whether it's true or not, it was my perception, that I lived in a very strict household. So something about all of a sudden for both Christopher and I having all this freedom, we both were raised by very loving, well-intended parents. Like we weren't traumatized by our families or had any of those big traumas. However, we did experience this. It was like I don't want to put words in your mouth, Christopher, but I remember being raised feeling like I was suffocating. I didn't have the freedom to express any emotions that I was feeling. I didn't have, it was suggested that appearances, the best appearances are these ones. I just felt like myself, it felt like being imprisoned. So to suddenly have all this freedom to do whatever, it was a really big transition in life because now I don't have these skills. I don't have the skills in those micro moments in life. I didn't have them with my parents to share maybe something annoying or challenging that happened with my peer group in middle school or high school. And for that to be received with prompts like, oh, tell me more. Or what is that like for you? They didn't have those skills. And that's also logical. So what I was met with instead was advising and shoulding. Well, you shouldn't. Remember my mom, because this was from her generation, just keep saying, Danny, sticks and stones will break your bones. Remember, words will never hurt you.
Which is not really true.
It's not true. That's all that was hurting, like were the words. You only can pass on what you believe true, her conditioning, right? So it was all very, very well intended. So I just was not prepared, not as though this was anybody's fault. It's just what was. I felt very, very restricted. So by the time we both left our homes, it was like, woo, we can do anything. Nothing glorious happens when you're blasted drunk. Like every embarrassing thing I have ever done only involved alcohol.
So there's this setup that, so many of us experience that we're not really met, kind of a close connection or attuned empathy, that we feel like we don't have the skills to handle hard things. And we get out on our own and we're doing what everybody else is doing, which is also not very skilled. And then some people seem to kind of get their feet back on the ground and they don't get heavily involved with addiction, but many, many, many people do. And if we include things like gambling and online shopping and all of the different other things and food and alcohol, other drugs, Netflix, online gaming, like just being on our phones, it seems like most of us are pretty susceptible to addictions. And I know part of that is how our brains operate, with dopamine and those kinds of things. But what's your sense of the use of psychedelics for therapy now, for helping people to find a way in? So if we have that sense of, I can't afford to see what's here, many of us, we talk about inquiry and that mindfulness, really getting to know ourselves. But for some people, maybe the fear, or do either of you kind of have any comments about the way that psychedelics are being used now?
I have an opinion. I am very much for there being trained facilitators, highly trained facilitators to guide people through a process. And of course, it doesn't mean just one session with the psychedelic, right? It means very in-depth pre-work together so that everyone feels really good about, is this a wise next step? Could it help you? Is your chemistry supportive of this step? All of those facets. Many people, and I have a very dear friend and colleague who worked on the Harvard psilocybin studies, and she was a trained facilitator in that study and led many people through those. I've come to find again and again, when it's a good match, when that path is a good match for someone, and there are a lot of factors and variables that determine if it's a good match or not, it can be one of the most transformative and important events of their lives that they don't feel or think needs to be now repeated. They're not chasing the mushroom. It's a very deep process, life-changing, perspective-altering. And for many people, it affords them the ability, maybe for the first time, to connect to their true nature, their essence, to finally have an embodied experience of what they are, not who, well beyond their identity. And I think when we can glimpse and feel in an embodied way in a journey, our essence, it's like you've been given the key to your own kingdom. It's like you now remember what you are, and you can work with someone skillful after to integrate what happens in that session. And how do you continue to integrate further what you received, the gifts you received in the curriculum of your life? I think it's brilliant. I've used it personally for myself, and I can speak from experience. I used psychedelics a lot in my youth. And at 25, on my last trip, I heard the words loud and clear, and I really was using a lot. This is the last time. Now you go find out how to experience this without it. Because it does show you a tremendous amount about the vastness of mind and many, many things. So then when I was in my 40s, I did one journey guided by a skillful facilitator. And I doubt I will do one again. Like, it was that meaningful. I still summon the takeaways and the gifts of that session in my meditations. Right? I have my folder of events in my life that are the most precious. And I oftentimes will enter into a meditation with that feeling embodied. I love that as an entrance to meditation. And that session in particular was profoundly life-changing. So that's my experience and my opinion. And again, I also don't think it's for everyone. So I think it's very important to have someone have this skill to help you to ascertain if it's a good step for you.
I asked Gabor Mate that a few years ago when we were talking about ayahuasca. And he said, it's like taking a rocket ship across a country. It's a high, you get a long distance, you can go really deep, compared to maybe taking a bicycle across the country. It's a lot slower, but you integrate it in a different way.
Yep.
And he also really talked about that integration piece, is the assimilation, and to use it as therapy. And maybe you can comment on that too, Christopher, about chasing the high. Like, we want to get the high, but when we're using psychedelics as therapy, it's not really about the high. It's about, although, it is important that we have those glimpses, no matter how we get them. Those glimpses are important.
Yeah, I don't have a firsthand experience of the research that's happening with psychedelics as therapy. And I, like Daniela, think that there is probably tremendous good that can happen there. And tagging on what she was saying about a glimpse of an experience of what you are, the paradox in all of this is that it's already here. You can't become that. You can't step into that. You can't bring it in or call it in. Like, what we are is inherent. It's there all along. And the trap with many of these substances is when the belief develops that you need to keep using something or having a repeated experience to try to reconnect with what you are. You're immediately creating a disconnection where there wasn't one to start with that then you need to work through. I'll give you an example. When I was in my 7-year struggle to become free of my marijuana addiction, the image that repeatedly came to me is that of a raft. There's crossing the river or the ocean, or there's show up in a lot of different teachings. And for me, the repeating image was that I was given a raft to cross a river that I really needed to and wanted to cross. And when I got to the other side, I put the raft on my back and carried it with me, thinking this raft was really, really, really useful. I might need it again. And so every single day I was carrying this burden that no longer had utility for me. And I was denying, accepting that I had been carried across this river. And if another river came across, maybe a raft would be there as well. I don't know. And it just felt like I had, by embracing the repeated use of these substances, that I was creating my own burden, and further and further and further distancing me from what it is I was really seeking. And I remember when I was in my 20s, I had an early hint of this. It's kind of wild. I had so many warning signs. It's interesting that I fell into the stickiness anyway. I remember reading a book called Storming Heaven, and it was about the days when all of this was legal, and Aldous Huxley and Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, and they were all doing their research, and they had all this pure grade, scientifically, chemically created substances. They had all of it. They had the mescaline and LSD, and they just gathered it all up. And they really believed, it's called Storming Heaven, they really believed that these things were going to open up the portal to divine consciousness or whatever. I don't know what their words were. And there was a time where they went to an estate in upstate New York. They had it for as long as they wanted, all summer. And there was a tower set in the back. And they were going to take turns going up to that tower and doing the cocktail mix and staying until they permanently broke through into the state of enlightenment, right? Mm-hmm. That's what they were going for. Every attempt, and they'd have people bringing, carrot juices up and more LSD or whatever it is. Like, they took turns. Everything is cleared. There's nothing in the way. There's no reason not to use these substances to reach the highest goal. And they didn't. They didn't. There was a glass ceiling there that somehow was preventing them from getting higher. And so it was a real warning sign for me that I ignored, that the repeated use of these substances won't go further and further and further. Like Daniela said, it provides a glimpse, it opens some doors. In the therapeutic aspect, with a skillful guide, I'm sure it can be incredible. I've certainly read reports about that. And in the end, for those of us that don't have a built-in chemical imbalance where medicine is important and necessary on an ongoing basis, I think in the end, stepping back from that, putting the ref down and acknowledging this is not necessary anymore, I don't need this anymore, is a key part of the step. In the end, where I started to feel free was I became unburdened from this and stopped using these. And now, like Daniela said earlier on, that in the end, they quit me. And they didn't quit me because I effectively pushed them away. And they didn't quit me because I consumed the right mix of things to finally surpass them. Right. They quit me because I brought them in and started to find out, why did I bring them in the first place? What is the medicine here? Like, why did I bring this particular medicine in? And do I no longer need this? Or is there a healthier way for me to approach that energy or that longing or that experience? That was really the key turning point for me.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk a bit about Yoga Farm. Both of you are teachers. You know hundreds and thousands of students. So maybe you could each comment on what's your sense of where people are at with this journey. And what do most people, I know that's kind of a general thing, maybe you could zero in on something too, but what's your sense of what people need and what they're looking for? And how does yoga, Qigong, and those embodied practices, how do they work with that, within that?
My opinion, as one of the directors, Christopher and I co-founded Yoga Farm together.
Yeah, it was 2015. It interestingly sprouted right as I was concluding that whole chapter of my life. The new thing was ready.
So this was our baby together here in upstate New York, right outside of Ithaca, New York. And our third co-director, Jeannie O'Neill, joined us. And it was the three of us that then created Yoga Farm Ithaca as the nonprofit. So we've served thousands of students globally, both in person and online. We're primarily online now. It's my opinion, as I really get to know our students and to see a few things. One, I'm certain that the universal needs of the human being are connection, fulfillment, and that alive sense of awe and astonishment and wonder. And as we really get to know our students, it's like as rare as a unicorn for a student to arrive that could honestly say, I don't have an addiction to something. That they would say, I know that's not really best serving me ultimately, right? I don't consider something that does serve us really to be an addiction. That's nourishment, or that's a high quality self-care. So wouldn't work to attract students, frankly, is if we said, free yourself from addiction. Because a lot of people don't realize they have an addiction. It's become, like you said, so normalized, right? One of the leading groups and demographics that turns to alcohol are mothers with young children at home, because they have the 5 o'clock wine, right? So I think everyone, and even one of the virtues in Enneagram that we teach, we like the model of Enneagram, we weave that into a lot of our trainings. One of the virtues in that model is about how do we learn to live life sober? And sober through that lens doesn't mean addiction free per se. It doesn't mean you can't have a glass of wine. It means can you be equipped to be with the truthfulness of the living moment at play exactly as it shows up and not need to turn to something immediately to change the way you feel? And that is honestly what I think we bring to our students' lives, is that process. Because we see again and again over their experience with our trainings and our 200-hour, our advanced trainings and our smaller courses, that over time and their work with you, their addictions just start loosening. They're not applying force or willpower to stop them. You can learn how to be with life sober, meaning you can learn how to be with life as it is. And it is a very learnable skill to be with the sensations of your emotions. Most people that come to our training, these are intelligent, brilliant people. And I didn't learn this until I was in my 30s. Many people don't know how to feel their feelings.
Right.
I thought, well into my 30s, I'm feeling my feelings. And actually what I was doing was thinking about why I'm feeling my feeling. I had no idea that I wasn't feeling great. So I had no idea about, feelings are the embodied sensations from here down that are the result of my emotions, that result from believing what I'm thinking true. I had no idea about this map. And so as we share these maps with our students and they test them for themselves and live them, suddenly they're starting to speak up about, oh my gosh, I didn't even want to say that I had this addiction, and I did, and I'm noticing it changing. I'm noticing it shifting.
Mm-hmm.
I think tagging on to what Daniela is saying, it's very difficult to navigate the road of your life without clear vision, without having some clarity. Like imagine you're driving and your windshield is covered with dirt. It's very difficult to be safe on the road without clearing that. The lens that I see things through is that meditation is the primary way that the lenses get clear, that a daily process of sitting with the feelings, like Daniela was mentioning, the sensations in the body, all of the thoughts, that everything that happens to our day needs time to integrate. Meditation is that integrative process. And I think in the end, somebody would have a very difficult time becoming free from substances and moving through life in a sober way without the supporting balm of meditation. Now, meditation is very difficult for somebody to learn right away because there's so much there, right? Like imagine your windshield was covered with an inch thick of mud and you have a dry toothbrush. Like there's only so much you can do there. And so it can get frustrating because you start to work on it and then you realize how much is here, what a backlog is here. How many years have I, for me personally, how many years did I deny feeling sad? Literally anything happened that would have me feel sad, I would go get high because I didn't want to feel sad. So I had that whole backlog to process. And without the gift of a meditation that helped me to feel effortless and non-judgmental about my own experiences, I would not have made my way through that. The yoga and the Qi Gong then are preliminary practices to the meditation. So meditation is a preliminary practice to a life of clarity and freedom. Embodiment, dance, running, right? Yoga, Qigong, these are preliminary practices to meditation. Because with yoga and Qigong, as we move and push and pull and stretch and breathe, all of these experiences that are somehow in our energetic or physical beingness start to connect with each other. So little pockets of hidden away sadness or traumas or tragedies or memories or history have a little bit of time to come out, and they get integrated, and they come out in a way that sometimes can feel kind of explosive and sometimes comes at just enough to navigate, right? You're cleaning that windshield a little bit today, a little bit tomorrow, a little bit the next day. Eventually it's clear. For me, I was practicing yoga probably for 10 years before I even began to explore meditation. And then another 5 or 8 years where I was exploring meditation before I was ready for the inquiry process, where I was able to step into the spacious freedom that I now experience most of the time. My mind is now a friendly place to be. So there's layers of practices that were essential for me in order to be able to meet my mind with understanding and start to enjoy my inner space. And that really was the meditation. Finding a meditation that was appropriate for me, for my constitution, was an indispensable ingredient. And I enjoy meditation as much as I enjoy sleep. Like, I can't even imagine going through a day without 5 or 10 or 15 minutes of allowing this integration process to happen, so that my life experiences don't accumulate into something that causes me stress or anxiety.
Mm. Well, and that's a pivotal point where we can get to, I have enough optimism here that I'm willing to be present with the trauma that's stored in my body. I'm willing to feel sad. I'm willing to feel anger. I'm willing to really be clear. This is what's here. So that's something that I've experienced too, is my mind is much more quiet, more free. I think sometimes people need that kind of optimism. And sometimes I'll say to people, you can kind of borrow some of mine for a while until you really experience it yourself, because this is reliable. This works. And so everybody's path might be a little bit different, but moving our body in a way, the inquiry process of what's really going on, how can we be friendly with ourselves, be on our own side, the compassion that arises. So, what are your thoughts about what are the barriers? What is it that gets in the way of someone who's come to, Yoga Farm or come into your world and says, I'm really ready to let go of some of the stuff that's causing suffering? What are some of the elements that might be helpful for people to know?
There are lots of barriers for someone to really stay steady on the path, right? One of my teachers always describes this, the journey of the bird with two wings, one wing being our steady self-effort and the other wing being grace. And grace enters when we continually position ourselves with our steady self-effort. And I think that is one of the biggest barriers, is to establish a time during your day and to not sell it out for anything. And I think this is oftentimes why people enjoy morning practice, because you start your day, here you are, this new one precious day, and meditating in the morning, moving in the morning, really readjusts every single day your interior compass, right? Setting it to align with what you cherish most, whether you call it your samkalpa, your intention, or just what you cherish. Understanding and living consistently that way is what then prepares you to be the gift that you are for the rest of your day. It prepares me to feel more present with myself, more present with others, more flexible where I can be rigid, more compassionate where I can be judgmental. So it's like my best shot at having the best possible day I can have by being present and engaged and uplifting for myself and others. So I think that when people don't understand the importance of having a space or a place, and it doesn't have to be large or a beautiful studio. One of my favorite spaces in my entire life was a little square room on James Street, that was just like such a little sanctuary. My mat just fit at the bottom of my half bed. Like, I loved that spot. And it's that steady, consistent, everyday something versus just once a week. So I think that can be a barrier that may not be so intuitively obvious would be a barrier.
Right.
What about you, honey? What barrier are you present to?
Well, Lynn, you mentioned there's some optimism needed and you can borrow some of mine, right? That's so beautiful. And as teachers, we're always willing to offer optimism where we can. However, I think somebody who's actually shown up to us or to another teacher or to a course or some self-help or self-development, I think there's two things that are happening. One is that something is starting to crack. The old saying, the cracks are how the light gets in. Like a shell is cracking. If it's not cracking yet, they wouldn't be in our program. They wouldn't be in your program. They wouldn't be showing up. So they show up when something starts to crack. And that can feel not great. That can feel and look like and sound like any of life experiences, that cracking. And two is they have felt that light. They felt a ray of something.
Mhm.
Something has connected them to the vibrancy of life, to a feeling or an experience that they cherish, to source or divinity or to God. Something is there. There's a lifeline that the cracks or where the light gets through. So somehow that light, that ray of light, is something that they can follow, again, that they can start to reinforce that. So, one of the barriers we have, or I had, was wanting everything to happen at once. And as Daniela's mentioned, there's a steady self-effort there. So keep showing up, being gentle with yourself. Don't judge yourself as being unworthy or not good enough, because this is the process. This is the human journey. We just have been sitting here for an hour sharing this with you all. This is our journey. I would not be sitting here. I wouldn't be teaching yoga. I wouldn't be helping with this nonprofit school if I hadn't had that journey.
Mhm.
So that journey wasn't a problem. It was the way for me. So a pivotal part of my transitioning into away from substance abuse and addiction was recognizing this isn't the enemy, that this is actually my training. This is my proving ground. This is where compassion came from, compassion for myself, compassion for everybody else who's navigating anything similar to what I did. I wouldn't have that if I hadn't followed that path. So the cracks that are showing up seem like a barrier, seem like a problem, and they're actually the beginning of the breaking apart so that more and more light can start to shine in and the healing process can continue.
It's beautiful. Mhm.
I think there's also sometimes a perceived barrier where students can have an image in their mind's eye, or they've seen other teachers online or in courses, like have a really clear, peaceful, loving presence while teaching. And I don't know them personally when they're not teaching, so for all I know, that's literally how they walk around, they spend their life. And I think that we can sometimes misunderstand and think awakening, enlightenment, being awake to the dream, all these phrases mean we are now in a perpetual state of bliss. We don't get reactive, that we are like just walking around beaming love all the time.
Right.
And that's why my heart is very happy that more and more teachers are coming out and being a guide for others, where they're sharing their humanness. They're sharing, oh, here's where I was reactive this morning, and here's what the tool I used and to center myself, and here's how I amended that and took responsibility and cleaned that up. That asked for a do-over and did that right. So I think it's important for students to see the humanness of themselves and even their teachers, so that there's not an inadvertent projection of an image of there's a beginning and a middle and an end to this journey, and the end is you are just love all the time. You're unruffleable.
Right. And it's much more honest and much more hopeful, I think, to say, I'm not as ruffleable as I used to be. And I have a lot of really great tools. As soon as I notice it sooner. I can come back, and not to project some kind of mythical, I'm always just, I'm always, that's just not true. Yeah. Near the beginning, Daniela, you talked about connection. I would love for you both, and maybe you could bring in a little bit about what you do at Yoga Farm too. I know that a big part of the magic there is the connection with each other. But can you just both speak to that a little bit, the value of connection and healing and just whatever you want to say about that?
We're hardwired. Our strongest fundamental need as a human being in this incarnation is connection. And the lack of it leads to, I think, is what is one of the greatest epidemics that we're seeing in our culture. And that is the epidemic of loneliness, of deep loneliness. Connection is so profoundly healing, to have people come together that are kind-hearted with one another, that are present with one another, that authentically get to care and be cared for by one another. It is the fundamental need of the human being, and we serve those, we don't serve people who have chosen the monastic path typically. All of us, all of our students, have said yes to the path of engagement in life. We've said yes to being in relationships and having work. And ideally our work ends up being something that brings us fulfillment. We're not on the solitary path. We've said yes to the path of engagement in life, intimacy in life, being immersed in relatedness with one another. And it is one of the most devastating feelings to feel, to think and feel, I don't matter.
Mm.
And for what purpose do I exist? And really nobody would care if I was here or not. That is like the most painful existence I could fathom.
Yeah.
And so we teach with that awareness. We do our very best to create community that is the foundation, that, we do get to know our students. We know our students' cats and dogs' names, and their children that cartwheel through class behind them on Zoom. And it's the little things. It's just knowing the little things about one another has you feel, wow, I spoke about something and you remembered a month later, hey, how's Nana doing? I remember a month ago you said she had that thing, did the eyes heal up okay? We really love our students. We see who they are going to be out in the world. Well, we see them as the answer to our prayers, because they're like the dandelions. They go out in the world and they share. First, they've connected to the friendliness within. There's connection with yourself. And they have friends, like true friends that they get together with now on planet Earth. And they're sharing these self-loving practices with others in the communities in which they're called to serve. So I just love that we have such a diverse student base and student body. And they are now bringing connection out into the world and creating spaces for people to come together and eye to eye, heart to heart. And that's really what it is. Like, we see our students, we see all of these eyes, and it's like all of these hearts are right here. And it is the most fulfilling feeling to see them bringing this out into the world.
It is. Yeah.
And we see those eyes and those hearts, and it's easy to think that what we're here to, quote, teach is more important than that. And what we've discovered in our classes and coursework here at Yoga Farm Ithaca is that, loneliness is pervasive. It's everywhere. Some people are alone and lonely. Some people are not alone and lonely. And rare is those who aren't experiencing loneliness, at least some in their life. And so whatever else a course might be about, whatever else we think we're there to teach, we always keep the idea that at least 50% of the value of this for them is in the connection, that we're so hardwired for it. And so much of what addiction is there is us grasping for things that help us feel not lonely. So recognizing that there's this deep loneliness issue throughout our society, even as we have more and more devices that look like they keep us more connected, in a way they don't. There is a story on social media where a man brought his grandfather to the bank, right? Like, will you come get me and drive me to the bank? And they do all these things for a couple of hours. He drives his grandfather around for running errands. And at the end, he's like, Granddad, like, there's an app for that. You didn't need to have, like, he helped him. You didn't need to have gone to the bank to do that, to transfer the money. You could do it on the app. You didn't need to have gone to that place to do that. You didn't need to. And Granddad said, yeah, but then I wouldn't have gotten to have a conversation with this person about that. I wouldn't have gotten to hear about Nana and the eye. So something's been lost here with our technological sophistication. And we can use our technological sophistication like we are right now to stay and create and cultivate connection, which is an antidote to loneliness. Mm-hmm. And so we place a high value on that and make sure that is factored into the courses and the classes and the time that we have, and all different ways to help people make friends and to feel seen and heard. It's really very important.
It is. One of the effects of trauma is the disconnection that we have. One of the benefits of doing this work is that we are actually able to be present. So when someone talks about Nana and the eyes, we're listening. We're not thinking about something else. We're not thinking about, well, I had this experience, I'll share that next or whatever. We're just actually listening, and we're with each other. And to be able to do that, to bring a kind heart to this connection with each other. The two of you and people that I've met through Yoga Farm have really exemplified that generosity of spirit and the open-heartedness. And thank you both so much for this conversation today. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much for being such a brilliant light in my life and my journey, and in the lives of so many students, so many friends, so many hearts around the world. Your seva, your service from your warm heart every morning with your 7 days a week, plus your Sunday groups, plus this and plus that. Just thank you for recognizing I can show up, and this care, the care and love that comes through you as you, it is life-changing. There are so many of our students that, sometimes and it's so beautiful, they'll share, post, thank you, Yoga Farm Ithaca, thank you, my teachers, and especially thank you to Lynn Fraser for la 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 la, right? Like for helping me to actually connect to my body, for the practices that had me being friends with my mind, and for you helping so many students feel at home in their bodies.
Well, thank you. I think the open, warm-hearted people recognize each other and value each other. And that's one of the things that all three of us bring to the work that we do. Thank you for watching the Radical Recovery Summit 2023. To watch more of the interviews and the clips, and to share with your friends, please go to radicalrecoverysummit.com.